Hi, I'm Morten Solvik, Vice President of Mahler Foundation and host and producer of the Mahler Hour, where we bring you the personalities, places, and projects happening right now in the Mahler community around the world. Welcome. Last month on the Mahler Hour, I was joined by Benjamin Korsvet as we explored the fascinating connections between Gustav Mahler and the great Austrian symphonist Anton Bruckner. Their personal relationship, their mutual admiration of Wagner, their similarities and differences as composers of orchestral works, all as something of a preview of this year's Mahler Festival in Steinbach am Attersee, coming up at the end of this month. Remember, you can see this show and all past Mahler Hours on our website and on our YouTube channel. For this episode of the Mahler Hour, we are turning to one of the giants of Mahler research, Henri-Louis de Lagrange. His incomparable dedication to the life and works of the composer led him to compile one of the most detailed biographies of an artist ever written. This month, on the 100th anniversary of his birth, we will be taking a closer look at this enormous accomplishment and the man behind it. Before we get to the details, let me remind everyone attending live to post any questions you might have to the comments section. We will get to these at the end of our show. Don't forget to include your name and the country you are writing from. Also, the Mahler Hour is brought to you by Mahler Foundation. So if you want to support our activities, please become a member. Just go to our website at mahlerfoundation.org for all of the details. Turning to Henri-Louis de Lagrange, I want to begin with the author's background and some of the main stations of his life. For this, we will be seeing excerpts from the excellent biographical documentary by Jason Starr entitled For the Love of Mahler, the inspired life of Henri-Louis de Lagrange. Henri-Louis de Lagrange was born in Paris on the 26th of May, 1924, to Henri Baron de Lagrange and his wife, Emily Sloan, of the New York furniture family. Here we hear his own summary of his background.
I was born in Paris, but I did start my studies in the north of France, in the castle. My father was a senator there, and therefore for him, this place, which came from the family, was tremendously important. And he was a pilot, and he was in the army. And he went to America and had met President Franklin Roosevelt in 1918 at the end of the First World War. Later, he was able to meet him again and convince him that France needed planes. He practically had to convince Americans that wars could not be won without planes. My mother hated the North. She never said it because she adored my father. She suggested that they might wait in the south of France for the end of the war, since he was too old to fight at that time. She had a beautiful sailing yacht. This boat, naturally, when they left France, they stopped in Corsica, because it is one of the most beautiful coasts in the world, really.
De Lagrange spent time on both sides of the ocean growing up and eventually studied music at Yale University and with Nadia Boulanger in Paris. Circumstances brought him to Corsica, as we've seen numerous times, and it was here that he began a new chapter of his life.
Corsica is a very important page of my life. I love the Mediterranean so much, I thought I must try and find a little house. At that time I had very little money, so I knew it couldn't be a big house. So I went to Calvi, Corsica, where I had been as a child, and I discovered that there was a small house which seemed to be my size, so I was able to buy this little house. After a few years, I was taken to the convent of Alciprato. And this beautiful old house was falling into ruins in the middle of weeds and dry grass, and it was very, very sad to see. But I could see it could be restored. So I sold all the farms that I inherited in the north of France, because the north of France is absolutely sinister. I'm sorry, it's sad to say, because it's so damp and there's so many mosquitoes in the summer. And I restored this wonderful old convent. This was kind of duty to restore this house. And I kept the same style, and I kept the chapel of the convent. I still had Mass celebrated there. Everybody thought Alciprato must be combined with music somehow. And I agreed that it should, because the place was ideal to listen to music. And when I organized that first concert, there was a very good program. And I had made it a social event because I wanted all the local people to come and realize that this would be a place that would be wonderful for music.
It was here, too, that he met the love of his life, Maurice Fleuret, composer, music journalist, and arts producer. Let's listen now to how life in Corsica developed for the two of them.
I thought I should invite the best critics in Paris, because that would be a great help for Corsica. And I invited 4 critics, and Maurice Fleuret was one of the best. The Nouvel Observateur, he was very interested in contemporary music, and he was one of the first people in the world to organize a series of concerts on the same composer. Days of Stockhausen in Paris, days of Berio, days of Ligeti, and things like that. Very soon after I met Maurice Fleuret, we decided that our lives were going to be connected as long as possible, and they did remain so. Maurice was a born communicator. He always had ideas, and one of the first ideas he got, we must use this house to organize a small music festival. And he thought it would be wonderful to be able to put up the artists perhaps in the house and then have the concerts right there. It would be so wonderful for the artists. And the artists we had, they really enjoyed a woman like Jessie Norman and Alfred Brindle, who was a great friend of mine. They all came and they loved Alciprato because they stayed there and played there. That made Alciprato very, very popular. I had Stockhausen for 2 weeks in Corsica. He wanted to learn to scuba dive. He thought the idea was interesting, but then he thought maybe Germany would lose its greatest composer, so he hesitated a bit. And we didn't go on with the scuba dive, but we did have fascinating conversations. But sometimes it was difficult for me at breakfast to hear about the planets and the future of the Earth and things like he liked to talk about. But it would make me a bit dizzy, but perhaps it was a pleasant dizziness. Thank God this happened, because Alciprato was such a beautiful place that I could have found myself with a Corsican version of the chateau I had in the north, which means something really to show simply, but that had no meaning. When the festival was finished, since we did practically everything ourselves, we were absolutely exhausted. And we decided that Morocco had to be not only a place to work, but also a place to relax. Maurice, he knew Morocco very well because he lectured in all the Moroccan cities. And naturally, being a lover of folkloric settings, we decided that we really wanted to get into the Medina. I couldn't work in Paris because Paris was the place where I lived, that's where I studied. But the moment I started writing, I had to get away.
Throughout this time, of course, Paris remained a central place socially and professionally. Over time, it became apparent that a special location needed to be chosen for the masses of material that was accumulating around the biographical work. And thus, in finding and buying the building in the Rue de Vézelay, The foundation for the future library was laid. Before we get into the details of the Mahler biography project and the collection, let's explore the more personal side of Henri Louis de Lagrange. What type of person was he? For this, I'm joined by a longtime friend and acquaintance, Vincent Moret. Welcome, Vincent.
Hello, Morten. Good to see you. Hello.
You're joining us from Tokyo today, so thank you for staying up and giving us some of your time. The Mahler world knows him, but how did you meet Henri Louis de Lagrange, and when?
Of course, I knew Henri Louis for a long time because I attended some of his conferences about Mahler. But we became friends, I think, in 1996 because I wanted to launch a website, the first version of the discography today hosted by the Mahler Foundation. And at the same time, it was a bibliothèque musicale Gustav Mahler at that time. They also launched a website. And I saw on the website it was possible to send an email to Henri Louis. Henri Louis was in his 70s, I think. I thought, I sent an email, but he will never answer. And 1 hour after he answered, he said, "Oh, hello, Maléoïd from Paris, I don't know. Visit me and let's have a tea together." And so a few weeks after, I visited him, and we had a tea indeed together, and progressively we became really friends. And you know, to see him in this video is very moving for me because I think we all miss him a lot. We all miss him a lot. And I would like also to thank Jason Starr because the movie he produced is really fantastic. This is the best description, the best portrait of Henri Louis.
And the movie does something wonderful. It goes beyond his work as a biographer. I mean, that is, of course, the central achievement, you can say, of his life. But of course, he was much more than that. And I want to begin with a special aspect. It came out a little bit in the film as well. He had a very particular place in society. I remember once seeing an advertisement for some sort of chocolate in Austrian television. It was Baron de Lagrange who showed up, and it was his image. I mean, he was the character of this fine chocolate, completely and having nothing to do with his agreeing to it. But he didn't really have much interest in being a baron, did he?
No, I think, well, he was very proud to be a professor. He was using Professor de Lagrange, and he was often saying that he was proud to be a professor because he deserved being a professor thanks to his work. But being a baron, he was saying, I did nothing for that. So he was not so much interested by it.
Yeah, it comes up in the film too. He makes exactly that point. He says, you know, I was much prouder becoming a professor than of my family background. But of course, it's due to his financial independence that we can be grateful for his time to pursue Mahler. What were some of his other hobbies? What else did he like to do when he decided he wasn't going to be working?
Of course, well, passion is a good word about Henri Louis. He was really passionate. And I remember when he met with my daughters, he was asking my daughters, "Oh, do you have a passion in life?" It was really important for Henri Louis to be passionate about something, whatever is this something. Of course, the center of Henri Louis' life was Mahler. And it's difficult to find other examples of a biographer so much involved in his topic. It's incredible. He knew everything about Mahler, even during the last years. It was incredible to discuss with him about Mahler. But he loved many musicians, many composers. Of course, the big names, Bach, Beethoven, Brahms. Not so much Bruckner, I have to say, not so much Bruckner. I remember we attended together some Mozart Bruckner program conducted by Daniel Barenboim. And at the end of the Bruckner symphony, he was saying in French, "Oh, c'était assommant. I mean, it's a combination of boring and painful, I would say. And when we visited in the lodge Daniel Barenboim after the concert, Daniel Barenboim recognized him and he said, "So, Mr. de Lagrange, are you still convinced that it's not possible to conduct properly both Mahler and Bruckner?" And the poor Louis didn't know what to answer. But as mentioned in Jason Starr movie, he was also passionate about many kind of music, contemporary music, of course. Stockhausen, he was a very close friend of Pierre Boulez, everybody knows that. But also some more exotic music like Balinese music. I discovered a CD of Japanese music, a very strange CD, very strange. Sometimes I propose to my friends to listen to this Japanese music CD, and most of the time after 3 minutes they ask me to stop because it's so complicated. So yes, he was very interested by many things. He was a cinema lover, probably more some classic directors like Robert Altman or Ingmar Bergman. But I remember the two last movies we saw together. One, it was a Russian movie, Leviathan, in the 90s, and also Tom à la Ferme. It's a movie by the young Canadian director Xavier Dolan. So he was very eclectic, and he was interested by everything. He was curious. He was asking questions, and yes, it's a very nice aspect of his personality.
This comes out too in his interest in, for instance, in Marrakesh and Morocco and other cultures and other music types as well. He spent a lot of time in Marrakesh, didn't he, with his sort of his ability to retreat into that space.
Yes, in fact, his year was organized on a very regular way. It was winter in Marrakesh, summer in Toblar, and spring mostly in Paris, but also traveling a lot. And we traveled together in many Malerian places, like, of course, Vienna, Gilava, Amsterdam, New York. So, and he was still traveling significantly until the last years, I would say.
Mm-hmm. And what was his relationship to nature? Mahler, of course, was fascinated by nature. What was Henri Louis' relationship to nature?
He loved the nature. It was mentioned in the movie, he mentioned scuba diving, and he did scuba diving for many, many years. And he admired a lot the oceans, especially near the Red Sea. We discussed that many times together. And he loved walking in the countryside. So of course, a lot in Toblar. I remember we walked many times in a fish line Boden, where there was this famous picture of Mahler. But also in Marrakesh, he was walking every day in the Agdal Gardens that are really nice. And in Paris, very often on Thursday, he was calling me, "Vincent, are you free this weekend? Can we go for a walk?" And on Sunday morning, we were driving either to Bois de Boulogne or to the gardens of the Versailles Castle, just to walk with the dog together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and of course, he had friends, but he was also very focused, wasn't he? I mean, what was his social life like? Did you have a sense of his circle?
I would say he had many friends, but not acquaintance. Really, he had strong relationship with many people, and he was able to build a connection with people from very different environments. I think it was one of his qualities, the capacity to listen to the other and to be interested by other people. Of course, many of his friends were from the musical world. And he mentioned to me so many times that Anna Mahler was such an important friend for him. I think it was not just because she was Gustav Mahler's daughter, But I think the relationship between Henri Louis and Anna was really very strong. Of course, also with Marina, and Marina will join later. He was a good friend with Pierre Boulez, with Marie Janssens. I was fortunate enough to have a dinner with Henri Louis and Pierre Boulez in Boston in 2000. We had dinner 2 times with Marie Janssens in Amsterdam. And I'm very grateful because Henri Louis introduced me to many people. And yes, it was really he was really able to have many good friends and to keep this relationship alive.
Mm-hmm. When you say Pierre Boulez, I'm reminded of the foreword he wrote to this enormous biography that he had finished in France, the Fayard, and Boulez is saying, biography really has nothing to do with the music, and I think that says a lot about, first of all, Boulez being honest and de Lagrange being accepting and still maintaining that friendship. That was quite a move.
Yes, it's a funny one. The first, I think the first introduction of the biography in English was done by Stockhausen, but for Fayard it was Pierre Boulez indeed, and the content was a bit funny for biography.
He said we don't need a biography to know the music, but of course Boulez had a very particular view of this as well. But I think it's fun to see these minds clashing and their friendships being maintained. I think that says a lot about them. I have so many things. We have so many things in our program today. I really appreciate very much, Vincent, getting a personal impression of Henri Louis. There's a lot of myth, and the grandeur of his achievement is so large that we often forget the human being. So I appreciate very much your comments today. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Just a reminder, if you are with us live, feel free to send us questions through the chat. We'll be happy to answer in a Q&A at the end of the hour. There was, of course, and this has been mentioned already, one extremely important biographical aspect to Henri Louis' life, and it was his contact with the family of Gustav Mahler. Let's hear him comment on his relationship to Alma and Anna.
In 1907, the last year that Mahler was directing the Vienna Opera, it became obvious that he had to find a new place to spend the summer. Since he had come here so very often, he felt that he would have an instinct relationship to this country. He needed a place to compose. He said probably Alma is the person who ordered the hut to be built. His most beautiful works was composed completely here. I feel very much part of Mahler's family. Not only because I knew Alma, because Alma was, I was going to say she was very kind to me, but she wasn't a kind woman, but she was kind to me. At that time, there were not that many Mahlerians in the world, and a tall, young Frenchman with a passion for music, a passion for Mahler, she took me seriously. Then I became very close to Anna. And Anna really believed in me, Anna Mahler. Such passion of everything, and she was so involved in so many things. She was naturally, a sculpture was her world, but music was very much her world too. I do remember playing four hands on the piano with her.
It was clearly with mixed feelings that he interacted with Alma, as important as she was. She was a very, very important person to the biographer. But as an individual, de Lagrange had problems, not always perhaps trusting what Alma had to say and her agenda. On the other hand, his relationship with Anna, Gustav and Alma's daughter, was much stronger. Here to talk about the legacy of the Mahler family and de Lagrange's work, but also her own many decades of friendship, is Marina Mahler, the founder of Mahler Foundation. Welcome, Marina.
Hi, Morten.
Hi.
Very, very moving, all that, to see it and to hear Henri Louis talking. Of course, the voice is maybe the deepest memory one can have of a person, because they transform over the years visually, but the voice is something very powerful. So that hit me quite strongly.
You, since Henri Louis was close with both your mother and your grandmother, you must have met him very early in life.
Well, it's possible when he came to California when I was a child, that I did meet him, but I may have been in boarding school. I have no recollection. What the first time I remember is in London, when I met him together with my mother. But after that, there was a long gap. And so I only much later became friends with him, and then also with Maurice when they were living in the house before that, when they first began the library, Avenue President Wilson, which looked on the Eiffel Tower. It was smaller, but that's where everything seemed to begin. And then when they moved to this huge building, 11 bis Rue Vézelay, then when I came to Paris, I stayed with them, and Maurice used to lend me his very exotic dressing gowns for breakfast. And we had breakfast on this, there was a little pull-down board in the kitchen, and just room enough for 3 little stools for the 3 of us. And and a thing you pushed for coffee. So we had breakfast together there, and that was wonderful. And then Hassan was there, who was the cook, and so lunch was always delicious and delightful. And there were many meetings there, and many passages in Paris, and so it was like a kind of home for me. And he became like a kind of uncle for me in a funny sort of way, because he felt like family because of Mahler. And I know he loved and was very close to my mother. And it was interesting because while he was writing about Mahler, he was communicating with my mother, and she wrote many letters. I think I want to say this, in some way protecting her mother, saying, no, you don't understand, you are much too strong against Alma, because she was wonderful in this and wonderful in that. She was like a goddess. These letters I would like to publish because they give another aspect. They shocked me, because I remember hearing from my mother that her mother was a tiger mama. And so when I saw these letters, they're in the Bibliothèque Le Grange Fleuret, I was kind of shocked and very fascinated. But I think they show another aspect of Alma as well, seen from the daughter, which is not generally known.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was a sort of dialogue between my mother and Henri Louis about Alma, which was fruitful. I think he was slow listening, and I, though he didn't like Alma, though Alma was very kind to him, she was very impressed. He was very handsome and intelligent, and he came, and she gave him, addressed in gold to Le Baron de Lagrange, one of Mahler's bâtons, which also shocked me in the beginning when I found out, because she was interesting with her instinctive likes and dislikes and so forth. But there you are.
So what you're saying is that while he was writing the biography, he was in touch with Anna. In fact, he must have been sharing chapters before they went to press.
Yes,
Before.
yes, he did. Yes, he did.
And this was at a time when your grandmother had already passed away. So this was
Oh, yes, long
a
after.
taken after the
Long after. And he visited her in Spoleto, and I have the photos, which are very nice. And then he said to me, oh, it's terrible, the palazzo. How could she have bought it? He was horrified because it was so Spartan, so unlike what he imagined to be a palazzo. Because, you know, in every room there was one piece of furniture, and nobody ate anything in particular. And for Henri Louis, the meals were very important, and they were wonderful, and he was used to the best possible. And so he would try to invite my mother and Albert into the town to have lunch or dinner there, because he couldn't bear to have lunch or dinner in the palazzo or in you know, the house in the center of Spoleto. But it was a funny, you know, it was a give and take, because my mother was radically different from, I think, anything that Henri Louis had ever met before.
What do you think made it such a strong friendship?
Well, the relationship to Mahler, obviously. I mean, he may say that, you know, and then of course it grew, and so, and my mother made a beautiful head of Maurice. I never understood why he never asked her to make a head of him, because that, I think she would have liked that, and it would have been a good head. But you know, for my mother, in her life, her sculpture was paramount.
Mm-hmm.
And so her life was based around that. And Henri Louis needed to reach my mother, and because of his overwhelming love and devotion to Mahler, her father, after all. And so it was all around Mahler, you know, whatever one can say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You spent time visiting in Paris, but you also took a trip to Japan, didn't you?
Oh, yeah, that was wonderful. We were invited to Tsuyama. And actually, Donald Mitchell also, but he flew in from England. And Henri Louis and I took the plane together. That was when I was still flying. And on the journey, he said, Marina, shall we have some caviar? Shall we split it? The cost, you know. So I said, oh, oui, but I love caviar. And so we had caviar together, and then we had very funny experiences in this wonderful Tsuyama, lost in the mountains. When we went to, I mean, I just have a firm two things. Okay, we went to visit a monastery, and the priest invited us to sit for a tea ceremony in a circle, and we were sitting like that, and Henri Louis was doing his best to make me laugh. So I had to concentrate, because we were served a kind of tea which was like ground grass with chalk inside. And we had to drink it with, and it was absolutely undrinkable. And so I did all I could to not look at Henri Louis, who was trying to make me. And then in the hotel when we stayed, and all we wanted was a pot of tea. It took something like an hour to explain what we wanted, and that we only first they brought us a cup with some boiling water and a tea thing, and then we said no, pot of tea. And finally, I went into the kitchen and I explained if they could boil the the pot, put the fresh tea in, and put the thing, and they came out. There were a row of 5 people coming out of the kitchen with this tea to Henri Louis and me, and we nearly died of laughing afterwards, because it was a procession. They were so proud to have understood this tea thing. It was, we had great fun, because he had a great sense of humor and loved to laugh. And we had many adventures, I have to say. Yeah, many.
You mentioned Donald Mitchell being on this trip as well. I mean, of course, this is another great figure in Mahler research of that part of the 20th century. How did the two of them get along?
Well, I think they were the friendliest enemies in history. I mean, of course, clashes and whatever, but in the end, out of the love of Mahler, they managed, I think, to spend every New Year's together or whatever. It was a ritual. and they managed to come together from. If you saw Henri Louis give a lecture, and you saw Donald give a lecture, it was another universe. Donald was standing up; he nearly danced his lectures. Henri Louis sat and intellectually presented a beautiful finished product. And I kept saying, why don't you film these lectures? Why don't you film these lectures? Nobody did, and I never understood why on earth they were not properly filmed, because they were priceless.
Yeah. Although Henri Louis was not unmoved. I remember towards
Oh,
the
he
end of
was very moved, but he didn't
came-
dance all over. He didn't dance all
No.
over the stage. It was completely internal, and
Yeah.
then it came out, and it was very beautiful.
I was so touched when he gave a lecture not long before he passed away, and he came to the end of his lecture, and of course with Mahler's death, and
I remember that one.
he's visibly touched. I mean, how
And
many
we all
times
were. Yeah.
did he tell that story? And every time it got him, every
Yeah.
single
Of
time.
course,
That
because
Mahler
there
had
is
to be
no
there.
time in such things. It's now ongoing, always.
Yeah. I think that he did. He lived that in the present. This touches on, I think, something I wanted to ask you about, and that was his obsession with your grandfather. What do you think drove? Can we define what that is? How that
Well,
can?
the music and the man, and he's not the only one. I mean, I meet every other day, I would say. It's quite extraordinary. Since my mother died, I've met a flood of grateful, loving, excited, moved, saved human beings from all over the world who have reacted more and more, I would say, and a lot of young people for whom he had changed their lives. Of course, he changed Henri Louis, and Henri Louis decided to do that. Other people do other things. They may be an artist. They may be. I know, for instance, that Kurosawa, I know from Takemitsu, the composer, Takemitsu told me that Kurosawa cut every single one of his films, a great filmmaker, with earphones listening to Mahler symphonies. And when he made the film run, he asked Takemitsu, Toru, he said, please make me a Mahler score. You know, I mean, this comes from all over the world, from from politicians, from, it comes from everywhere. And so I'm not surprised, frankly.
But and we are in being Mahler aficionados dedicated to Mahler. We are very privileged to have this kind of dedication to the object of our fascination, and have that written out and presented in a form that, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
So my question is, how do you see his accomplishment today? And I guess we're already answering that.
Yeah, he devoted his entire life to Mahler. There maybe have been other things in contemporary music and whatever, but his relationship with Boulez was also very much close to Mahler and the other musicians and whatever. And he loved music and was knowledgeable. But Mahler was at the center of his being. He was in love with Mahler. I think he was actually in love with Mahler to the point of being jealous and angry about Alma, because how to put it, he absorbed Mahler as a central part of his existence, because the music does that to people. But he made of it his life work. And that is a great thing. And everyone is grateful for that. I mean, it's a beautiful thing. And it made him grow in his own life. With Mahler, every year he grew with Mahler together. So for me, saying, but the Médiathèque Mahler was about Henri Louis and his love for Mahler, principally and mainly.
Yeah. Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts today, Marina. It's always wonderful to talk to you and to hear your experiences and your insights. Thank you.
Yes, and for Henri Louis, we will elaborate in the Bibliothèque La Grange Fleuret a more visible and audible relationship for Mahler, because we don't want him to vanish, because after all, he was the center of Henri Louis' life. And that's why he could hug MTT there with me together, and all these conductors, and Tom Hampson especially was a great friend. And Tom, so the friendship was around Mahler.
Yeah.
We mustn't forget that.
Yeah. Yeah.
A library is a library, but Mahler was his life work. There you are, Tom. Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Now let's take a look at Henri-Louis de Lagrange's work on Gustav Mahler. In October 2022, we dedicated an entire Mahler hour to the marvelous collection of Mahleriana that de Lagrange amassed over the years and made available to the public in the building that he owned in Paris's 8th arrondissement. Today, that collection has been incorporated into the Bibliothèque Musicale Lagrange Fleuret, housed in that original building. The archivist of the original collection, known as the Médiathèque Musicale Mahler, which you've just heard referenced, was Helene Partenot, who unfortunately was unable to join us today. I will, in lieu of that, share a few of her thoughts that she's written for me. When Henri-Louis learned of my arrival at the library, I already knew the name Monsieur de Lagrange from the 1985 radio broadcasts on the life of Mahler in 46 episodes, in which he was interviewed by Dominique Jamon. It was exciting and unforgettable. The English editions occupied our time for many years. Initially, my task was to prepare the chapters for the translators, searching for their source in the original language for each quotation. The editions of volumes 2, 3, and 4 followed one after the other. Over time, my work tasks increased. Apart from the organization of the Mahler department, there was the inventory of documents, digitization, contact and communication with readers, Mahler exhibits mounted for different places in Europe, iconographic research, particularly for the documentary films on Mahler. Henri-Louis, thanks to his important connections, received new documents every day from all over the world. The Mahler department had been considerably enriched over the last 3 decades with numerous materials. As an incomparable collector, he was also keen not only for his Mahler collection, but the entire institution. Henri-Louis was very demanding in his work and asked others to be so as well. His workday was strictly timed and was devoted mainly to work. In relaxing moments, he was smiling, fun, and warm. He cared about those around him and was caring and provided help if necessary. Finally, Elena writes, the years of work spent with Henri-Louis were incredibly intense, enriching, and unforgettable. I want to thank Helene Partenot for her thoughts. Henri-Louis de Lagrange's pursuit of the complete biography drove him ever onward into more detail and expanded projects, as we just heard. After finishing the 3-volume French biography published with Fayard, he decided it was time to provide the same depth of information in English, this time in an agreement with Oxford University Press. The 3 volumes turned to 4, leaving the first volume for last, as this was roughly the period covered by the first Mahler volume, published by Doubleday in 1973. I know that that's a lot to digest at once, but those of you reading the biography should know that it exists in several versions, every time expanded and ever growing as Henri-Louis found ever more information. In the end, this is where our next guest played a crucial role, for it was her contributions that in the end made it possible to finish Henri-Louis de Lagrange's lifelong dreams. It is my pleasure to welcome the musicologist and conductor Sibylle Werner. Welcome, Sibylle.
Hi, Morten.
I'm going to get you on camera here. There we go. Hi. Tell us how you joined the project and tell us about the nature of your involvement.
Well, I have to go back a little bit because before I joined the project on Volume 1, I was also involved in Volume 4. They are mainly on the appendices. I mean, I had met Henri-Louis in 2000 when he came to New York to lecture about Mahler and Roller for the Wagner Society. He had put that out on the Mahler list and so if anybody wants to know details, please contact Anne Marsh, his secretary. So I said, okay, where, when, how? And then he wrote back personally, oh, I've seen some of your posts on the Mahler lists. I would like to meet you. And that was part of his personality. He was very much interested in people and interested in people who were interested in Mahler. So I met him. We talked a little bit. We talked about Toblach, where I had spent 3 summers with my mother and niece because I had discovered that too. I said, oh, I'm in Toblach. When you're there, come visit me. So I visited him. That soon turned into invitations to stay with him. And after about 2 or 3 years, he gave me something to read, the appendices on music of volume 4. And that gradually turned into me getting involved with working with him on first on those appendices. And then later in 2011, he asked me to become involved in the book itself when he started revising volume 1.
Let's, just for our audience, explain just briefly again how this all worked, because it was a rather long and tangled history. Maybe we could start with Doubleday in 1973.
Yes, there was Doubleday that and Gollancz, they published the first volume in English. And then it was supposed to be 2 volumes, but it didn't go on to the second volume. Then in the 80s, he was approached by Fayard to do it in French. So he put out this 3-volume French collection. Then, as Alena said, came Oxford saying it would be nice to have it in English. So at that time, he was in his 60s already. And he decided, okay, if I don't get to finish this, there is a volume in English covering the first part of Mahler's life. I will start at volume 2. And a little bit earlier, it overlaps a little bit with the first volume. And then he finished volume 2, volume 3, volume 4 came out in 2008. But then he decided, okay, it's time to revise volume 1, which at that time was, 30 years out of date, more than 30 years. So that's why volume 1 became the last volume he published. By a different publisher, Oxford University Press did not want to publish this volume when he was no longer alive. And we finally found Breppo's publisher who took it on. So it looks different. The layout is a little different. It's not called volume 1, but it is the volume 1 to the Oxford series.
And so you were really involved in, as with always with Henri Louis' projects, not just in this case taking volume 1 and brushing it up, but pouring all of the information that he had already found and reinventing volume 1, I'm assuming. Is that correct?
Well, I think of it as a giant puzzle that we had to put together. I mean, it's deals with the first 37 years of Mahler's life. And since he had published the first one, and since also the first French one was published, so many new sources had come out. Especially, let's say, things from the Czech Republic that in the 70s wasn't really that accessible. Now we have this book that's put out by the Czech Society that deals with his first years in Jihlava, where you can find the essays he wrote for his high school graduation, where you can find all kinds of documents concerning his father's fight with the authorities. So that's one volume. Then we have Mahler in Laibach, we have Mahler in Kassel, we have Mahler in Leipzig, we have Mahler in Hungary. We have 2 books about Mahler in Hamburg. Knut Martner has done a lot of research. He has put together a chronology, which he made available to us, except for the Hamburg years there. For some reason, he didn't send us that. But so much material, all the things that Henri Louis had collected over the years from journals, from things that people sent to him. We have the letters that have been published, the family letters, the letters to Mildenburg. We have the letters that Justi in Hamburg wrote to her friend Ernestine Löhr and describing what went on in Hamburg. So much new material. So as the base, we used the French translation of the English translation of the French volume 1.
Right.
And of course, you can imagine what happens.
3 volume 1s in a way, right? There's Doubleday, then there's Fayard, and then there's this.
Yes. But when you think of the original sources sometimes being German, that for the first volume got to get translated into English. Then this English volume got translated into French, and then the French got translated back into English. Sometimes, many times, I just had to go back to the original sources to check.
I'm sorry, we've lost you, Sibylle. Can you unmute?
And here.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. Go ahead.
I mean, I remember one instance where it was saying, the altos are marching across the stage in Tannhäuser. Saying, I don't think altos march in Tannhäuser. I checked the original, and it was the march-like rhythm of the violas.
There you go.
Plus in French is altos, and then
Right, altos, yes.
yes.
Right.
So,
but tell us about, I mean, writing a biography is, of course, a lot more than just putting words to paper. So much we're talking about here, getting all the information. And I can tell us how this worked as a team, because you were a team. You were obviously working together, not only amassing the information, but turning it into a book with its own text. How did that work?
were there were more people to the team actually than just the two of us. For instance, Stéphane Bouchon, who had done a lot of preliminary work inserting things that he thought were crucial into the French text of the volume 1, which was not in the translation of the French text. So we had to see what is here, what is there. And basically what I say, it was a puzzle. We started in 2011 with chapter 1. I mean, only between the publication of volume 4 and 2011, which was, we submitted the text in 2000, was 4 years. He had somehow gotten obsessed with the history of the Jewish people in the Czech Republic before Mahler's birth. He had researched that extensively. There were many books about it in the Mediathek, and he had also gotten obsessed a bit with the issue of Hans Roth. So these two had occupied him. So in 2011, we started with chapter 1. And he wanted to have, all this Jewish history. And I might mention one more person, as he calls himself a keen Mahlerite and an editor, Richard Landau, who was involved also in volume 4, who worked on the linguistic aspect of things. And between Richard and I, we could convince him that it was not a very good idea to start with 30, 40 pages of the history of Jewish people in Czechoslovakia before Mahler got born. So
this leads me to another question. How much has not been published? I mean, there must be so many things that ended up on the editing floor.
No, most of it went into the appendix on Jewish history. Okay. So we decided between the three of us, it would be better we shorten it as an introduction, so people meet Mahler sooner than after 40 pages, and put all that important information into an appendix. It was important to him. It is important to see the background, but we thought the appendix was a better place to put it.
Yeah.
So
Henri Louis died in 2017 at the age of 92.
Right.
How far from completion was this final volume, and what did it take to complete it? Was the trajectory all clear by that time?
Well, let's start with the way we worked, actually, which was your previous question. Yes. The way we worked is, I mean, at first we read through it and I made some suggestions here and there and there and there. And at the age of 87, his computer skills weren't, let's say, not quite up to date. So he said, okay, you change this, you change that. Then first I was sitting at the computer, he was sitting next to me, we did some changes. Well, the first volume had been written on the typewriter. So there were structural problems, let's put it that way, because he would start writing about something and then something else and say, well, maybe we need to restructure a few things. We have to move this from here to here. Okay, you do it. So I became the hands of Henri Louis. We would discuss what was to be done. And then I would go off to my room. I would do it. I would do this. I would do this. And I marked exactly what I did. I put this here, put this there, here and there. Then we'd meet again. We discuss it, how that was done. If he was satisfied with it, then we took out the edits and the pure version. We went through it again, sometimes 2, 3 times, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So, after a while, he really trusted me. He didn't even want to see the edits anymore. He just said, okay, we'll do this and this and this. Just do it. And I can't wait to see my new chapter, And then we would discuss it. And many times we would sit there and zero in on the same thing. This needs elaboration. This word is not the right thing. Then he opened his big thesaurus to find the right word for it. Or maybe this could go, this needs a transition. So we would discuss this. So he would let me know what he wanted and I would do it.
Mhm.
And, as age went on, his input became a little less.
Yeah.
But I mean, at some points he would say, okay, we need a paragraph here, just write it. Whether you write it or I write it, it doesn't matter. We think along the same lines anyway.
Yeah.
So about 2/3 of the book were done that way before he became, not just before his death, before he became incapacitated when he had the accident in 2015. He
Right.
fell, he broke his hip. He went into a rehab facility where, first day in hospital there, something else happened. He ended up with a huge hematoma. I mean, at some point, he was critical whether he would survive.
Right.
He survived another good year. But at that point, also, I think the anesthesia affected him in some way that he really couldn't quite work anymore. He would read it and he would say, oh, everything is fine.
Mhm.
Yes.
Mhm.
But,
But to go back to the question, so you both knew where where the end of the volume was, what had to be discussed. It was all worked out fairly clearly by the time he was
fairly clearly what kind of things he wanted. I could really, after I worked with him for 4 years before he became incapacitated, and I knew his way of thinking very well. We spent months every year together, 2-3 months in the summer, 2-3 months in Morocco. It was a very symbiotic relationship in a way. And like I said, we often looked at each other and knew exactly, okay, that doesn't work. So
great.
when I brought him things, he was always very happy. And the more it went on, the less he really had to criticize or wanted to change. He said, oh, this is wonderful. It reads so well. I love my new chapter, So
tell us about the man Henri Louis de Lagrange, the personality. What do you remember most about him?
Well, Vincent already talked a lot about that. He was extremely disciplined. I mean, and he said that he did that on purpose, so he didn't have to think about planning his day. And that would a load of his mind. He knew exactly he was going to get up at a certain point, have breakfast, go for a walk, deal with his email, work a little bit, go for another walk, have lunch, have a little nap. Then he would read the New York Times, he would read Le Monde, then work a little bit more. Then he would go for another walk. He walked a lot. Then he would have his yoga, which was sacrosanct with him. He had to have half an hour of yoga every evening before dinner. And then sometimes he would allow himself to also watch a movie with his guests. He always had house guests. He was almost never alone. And go to bed at a reasonable hour and start again the next day. So he said that allows him to do the work, even when there were guests around. They knew if he went away after dinner, it was not antisocial. He wanted to work or he wanted to read, and he picked a movie for them. He had his catalog of movies. Oh, what could we say? See, he had this whole collection of DVDs in Toblach in Marrakesh. Let's pick this movie. Or in Marrakesh, we also had a classical channel, Mezzo. And towards the end, he was watching more of that, and also contemporary music, ballet sometimes. He was interested in so many things, and he was interested in people. If he always was interested in meeting new people, interesting new people. At one point, George Benjamin was at the house. It was wonderful. All these conversations. I mean, it's
Yeah, but he certainly knew. And that wall with the signed pictures was just one small indication of how many of these people who knew. And I think we mustn't simply see that as a sort of a superficial decoration. I think these are friendships and people who meant something to him. How do you feel looking back at this project? One final question, because we're at time, I'm afraid.
Well, not just this project, meeting Henri Louis changed the trajectory of my life. Between Mahler and Henri Louis, it went into this direction that hasn't left me yet. I'm now in Toblach, It led me to my husband. I mean, I mean, I'm so thankful that this one meeting in 2000 was the fountain of so many things, of so many meetings, so many interesting experiences. I mean, he was just somebody who, I don't know, who, when I first saw him at that Mahler connection, in that Mahler roller talk in New York, to me, he was almost like luminous, saying, I've got to know this person.
Yeah.
No, and my instinct was right. And I met him and everything bloomed. That's all I can say.
Yeah. Well, that's beautiful. Thank you, Sibylle. It was a pleasure speaking with you about this central aspect of the life and work of Henri Louis de Lagrange.
Thank you for
very
inviting
much.
me.
Thank you. I now turn to our audience and ask if there are any questions for our guests. We have channels open. I have one message that's come through here, and I guess any of my guests could take this, although probably most relates to you, Sibylle. I have a question from Sixtus Beck-Messer. Did Henri Louis, have a preference among Mahler conductors?
Henri Louis had great admiration for Jan Janssens and also for Eschenbach. And of course, Boulez, his great friend. So during the time that I knew him, maybe at other times, Bernstein also to some extent, but during the last time of his life, the living conductors were these three.
I don't have any other questions in the chat that I can see. I hope that that's correct. And at this point, I think I will move towards closing the show if there are no more questions. The Mahler Hour, brought to you by Mahler Foundation and contributors around the world, is a monthly streaming event bringing together individuals interested in the composer, the thinker, the humanist Gustav Mahler, as we explore not only his life and works, but also how his legacy still informs essential aspects of the human experience and how we can turn that experience into a force for the good in today's world. Become a member and support our activities. I want to thank my guests today, Vincent Moret, Marina Mahler, Sibylle Werner, as well as our production team, Marco Ayala, and Monica Angiano, our Executive Director for Administration. A special thanks also to Jason Starr for permission to show segments of his film For the Love of Mahler, The Inspired Life of Henri Louis de Lagrange, which is available at www.vaimusic.com. The Mahler Hour is off for the summer, but as every year, we will be posting a special edition of the show on Mahler's birthday, the 7th of July. We are back for a new season starting in September. I hope you can join us. That's our program for today. To end the season, I would like to give the last word to our great biographer, who speaks for all of us, I think, regarding the endless fascination for Gustav Mahler felt around the world. Stay safe. Thanks for watching.
There are many people in my life who are absolutely amazed to think that I could have spent so many years of my life, so to speak, with Mahler. And of course, I'm the only person who didn't find that strange at all. I think it isn't strange because I think Mahler is so enormously important as a phenomenon, as a man, as a musician, as a composer, as a conductor. Everything about Mahler is so rich. There is something very enigmatic about Mahler's music. Every time I hear a work of Mahler, I always hear something else that I don't think I'd heard before.